Hi friends, host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People. This video might be called Jordan Peterson Slaying Dragons, Ends and Means Based Propositions, and Meaningless Distinctions. So, I got in a weird fight with Shad this morning. Shad's a friend of mine that I know in real life from a long time back. He's a friend as well as of Corey's, and if you don't know my story, Corey's a former best friend who I used to basically don't talk anymore at all, but it causes me great suffering in my heart that that's the case. Anyhow, Shad was drunk, so I shouldn't have gotten mad at him, but I was in a pissy mood, and he was being an idiot, so I got all pissed off at him. But one of the things that immersed in that conversation was that he was a big Jordan Peterson fan. And that, I guess, he was interested and watched, or hadn't watched yet or something, but wanted to watch, I don't know, one of the videos that was about Jordan Peterson, a response video to it. So anyway, we argued a bunch of nonsense back and forth, but the thing I'd like to have conveyed, which I probably didn't and will convey in this video, is that when responding to Jordan Peterson, who has a lot of respect from a lot of people, it's an interesting phenomenon for me as somebody responding to it, because on the one hand, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it in general, because by and large, he's not saying anything I don't agree with, and by and large, he's not saying anything that makes a lot of new ground for me. That's not to say that he's not saying valuable things. He's just say that they're not particularly valuable to me. And that's probably because we've done ideational work in such similar areas, and as a consequence, have walked similar grounds and understand similar things in similar ways. Okay, so then I feel as though it's worthwhile for me when analyzing what I understand of Jordan Peterson, which is not a great deal. I'm not some scholar of his. I haven't watched a shit ton of his videos. I've watched a few of them, and I've watched more of him than I've really watched of anybody else, because I've been challenged to do so by so many people. So my point is, I'd like to be able to draw distinctions for the purposes of having things to draw distinctions about. However, it's a dangerous proposition when you're talking about people's intellectual idol to draw distinctions that say, well, here's where he could do better. Now, obviously, if I'm going to draw distinctions and say, well, he's wrong about this or he's wrong about that, that's simply competing with his ideas directly, and then people can hear the arguments, make a side. But instead, what I'm doing is I'm saying, I agree with what he's saying, but he should argue it like this. And I think that that's a difficult thing for people to, well, it's not a familiar phenomenon for them to respond to. So anyway, all of this talking here is to preface the distinction I do want to draw, which is between ends-based and means-based prescriptions. Both Jordan Peterson and I offer prescriptions to individual people as regarding their own moral agency, how one ought to use one's moral agency, and how one ought to understand moral agency in the abstract, such that when one applies it to other agents in the world, it's done so meaningfully and to good effect. Okay, one of the things that Jordan Peterson talks about is slaying the dragons, of stepping up to the plate and being, I guess, fearless in some regard, of recognizing in oneself your capacity for evil, acknowledging that, and of making sure to do the metacognitive work that is necessary, such that if you are positioned in a place where you have a moral choice to make, that you make the right moral choice. And I think that that's a very correct way of looking at it by and large. I would say that the slaying dragons aspect of it is misleading in a metaphor, as a metaphor, though, or at least is directing as a metaphor the person to the wrong place. So the reason for that is because it's ends based. It's suggesting that if we approach the problems of our life as a set of solution ready situations upon which to impose solutions, and are real in our evaluation of our own demons, then we're avoiding cowardice, that we're being moral agents who take action and do meaningful things. And I'm not saying that there is an alternative, which would be sort of an Eastern approach that says, no, let's not incur karma, let's do as little as possible, or be in a state of minimal impact upon the world. So that's an alternative perspective to the one that I would say that perspective contrasts against Jordan Peterson's perspective, and I would agree more with Jordan Peterson than I would with the Eastern perspective. But I would still say that the slaying dragons part is all well and good, as long as one understands the metaphor is limited as it ought to be. If it's slaying one's own dragons, great. Even then, though, I think the single greatest dragon of all to slay is the need for slaying to be transitive. So, learn to slay. Forget about the dragons. Dragons are a TE concern, if we use cognitive function stuff. One of the biggest problems that we have as a society is a fixation upon the difference between the status quo, the way things are, and our imagined ideal, how things could be or ought to be. So if there is a status quo in which there are a lot of traffic accidents that kill a lot of people, then we imagine that status quo against an ideal state where there weren't any traffic accidents, and we try to make it happen. The problem is, the traffic accident isn't my problem. So, if I have a problem with getting into a car crash, then I have a traffic accident. And I have a reason to complain about the fact that I've had a traffic accident. And complain in some sense, like say, oh no, I had a traffic accident, or whatever. If I then go and say, this intersection is dangerous, it should be changed because I had a traffic accident there, then that makes sense. Similarly, if a city says this intersection has accidents all the time, we should try changing the light configuration to try to reduce the number of accidents. People are always getting crashes at this intersection. Then that makes sense. Now, the reason it makes sense in those instances is because you have a clear, distinct goal that is situationally specific on a physical level. Like, not situationally, but locationally specific. So, it's in one location. And the issue is probably has something to do with how the humans have configured that location in order to enable or fail to enable this given set of behaviors. That's fine. The problem is there's then a jump, a leap that says, well, if that's okay, then it's okay for us to say drunk driving is a problem. Let's pass a drunk driving law. It's okay for us to say traffic accidents in general are a problem, and speed contributes to that. So let's have a speeding law. Okay, so that there's no equivalency there at all, because you're not talking about something that can be fixed. You're talking about something that can be potentially reduced through various kinds of systemic changes. But if the kind of systemic changes are not structural, in other words, it's not better paint for the lines in the road so you can see them better, but instead it's rules based, like traffic laws and such, well, then you have a whole nother ball of wax. You're saying, look, we've attributed these behaviors to correlate with traffic accidents more strongly than other behaviors, and therefore we're going to punish these behaviors with concrete particular harms to specific individuals in order to attain diffuse goods. That's where you run into problems, because it's not justified for a number of reasons. One, the link is weak. It's not necessarily clear that these things actually contribute at all to reduction in traffic accidents. In fact, what reduces traffic accidents much more effectively than increasing writing tickets and stuff like that is the addition of a sign that says how fast you're going near a speed limit sign. And people will slow down if that sign blinks. It increases vastly even more if the sign has a frowny face on it if you're going too fast, or a smiley face if you're going the right speed. Then people slow down consistently, and it dramatically reduces accidents compared against any other methodology. Now, does it dramatically reduce accidents compared against nothing? Probably not very dramatically, I would guess. I would say it's probably a small reduction if the causal link can be established at all. And that's the problem. It's a chaotic system. Some things where you add one little vector, like a smiley face or a frowny face, to a sign and have measurements over time can be pretty effective. But the role of increased ticket writing is a different matter, because only a select number of people are impacted by that. And it's very difficult to ascertain how much impact that actually has on the system as a whole. Usually, variables like that impact the system in terms of a critical mass point at which there's a state change. Now, that's not how it's being sold, though, and nobody's even considering the way that multivariable systems interact in that fashion. So, the reality is, we need to stop worrying about ends. We need to stop worrying about outcomes. We need to stop justifying stuff with outcomes. We need to stop looking to the world for explanations via data that justify our abstract metaphysical positions, prescriptive or normative claims that we're making, that fundamentally don't operate under those kind of rules. So, to the extent that I differ from Jordan Peterson, and I'm not sure I really do, except I'm probably coming at the problem from a different angle, it's that I promote a discursive solution that is means-based. I don't promote any particular conclusions, or particularly adherence to conclusions in general. I would advocate the acknowledgement that conclusions are claims, and to the extent that they have a legitimizing attribute, it's going to be truth. And truth, or falsehood, as an attribute, is something that we ascribe to claims situationally. The same sentence can be true in one context and false in another context. We can agree to a sentence for the purposes of argumentation without actually saying it's true. We say, yes, let's agree that it's true for the purposes of this debate. That's a different statement than I personally have a strongly held belief that this is true, this sentence here. Of course, in different contexts, sentences have different roles. If I have the sentence, hey, that dog bit my leg, and I'm saying it now, is it false? Well, what dog? I'm not referring to any actual dog. I'm using an example of a sentence that I might say in another context to talk about how sentences in different contexts have different meanings and therefore different truth values. So if I say, hey, that dog bit my leg, in this context, is it false? Well, no, because you don't know what dog I'm referring to. It says that dog, and who knows? You don't know what instance I'm referring to or anything like that. It has no truth value, basically. If you're talking about an actual instance where an actual dog bit my leg and I'm pointing to it and say that dog bit my leg and you saw the dog bit my leg, then it's true. You could also imagine a situation where the dog nipped at me but didn't bite my leg, and I'm like, that dog bit my leg, that dog bit my leg, I'm going to be all upset about it and make a big fuss. And that dog did not bite your leg. That's false. So you can imagine contexts in which it's true, false, or has no truth value. And the fact that in the one situation it's true or false based on whether the dog physically bit your leg, it's not really the case. It's based upon whether others agree or there's some sort of empirical evidence that functions as mutual consent, is more or less irrefutable by standard operating procedure and reality. If I see a video that shows like up close the teeth going sinking into the flesh, and it's, then it's pretty indisputable. You could dispute it. It could be faked or something like that. But in some contexts, we can imagine it being indisputable. Everyone agrees this is true and that's false. Just because in some contexts we would reach that consensus doesn't mean that the truth value of the statement isn't malleable in that fashion. It is malleable in that fashion. And that's why we need a discursive framework that focuses instead on the validity of argumentation and the integrity of the ecosystem of ideation, which is, of course, founded upon one thing more than anything else: the reciprocal burdens test. If it's okay for you to use that kind of reasoning to make your point, then it's okay for me to use the same kind of reasoning to make my point, if we're arguing about something. So, if you say, let's say you and I are arguing about why we should get, you saying we should get sandwiches, I saying we should get pizza. And you're like, listen, we should get sandwiches because we should always get the food that has more pickles on it, and sandwiches have more pickles on it, so that's it, okay? We should get sandwiches. And you go, except what you didn't account for is this pizza that I'm suggesting we get is literally covered in pickles. It's pickle pizza. And then the person goes, well, yeah, but we shouldn't get that. That's too many pickles. But you've just said we should always get the food that has the most pickles on it. And this has more pickles than your option, so we should get this over your option, yes? Oh, well, I didn't mean that. You're stuck. You made the claim that this is the criterion we should use. The thing is, the reason we do this sort of stuff is so that people can effectively make progress in communication. Can we both agree on this? Blah. Okay, now, if blah, then blah, right? Yes, okay, blah. And if blah, then blah, right? Yes, okay. And you really, really don't want blah, right? Okay, so if you do get your way on blah, then you're going to have to also get blah. Do you still want to get your way on blah or not? Making them acknowledge certain disadvantages. Like, the reason we have drug laws is because nobody's forced in this discourse about the conversation, about the topic of drug laws, nobody's forced the people who are advocating in favor of drug laws to substantiate their impacts in a real way. Nobody said, okay, hey, are you counting as impacts all the damage to the people who get arrested for drugs? Are you counting as impacts the damage to families who have family members ripped from them and thrown in jail? Are you counting those as impacts too? Are you counting it as an impact the corruption of the police system, the corruption of law enforcement in general, the corruption of the courts, the degradation of the Constitution, the reduction of the Fourth Amendment to allow cops to search people because why? Always because they're looking for drugs. So are you counting all those impacts? Nobody's compelled the advocates of these drug laws to count those impacts. In fact, nobody's compelled the advocates of these drug laws to count impact at all, because the reality of the conversation is the drug laws don't work. We know that now. In the past, it was still an open question, presumably, and so they were able to get away with presuming solvency, which is what people do all the time. Well, there's a problem, and I'm advocating the law. Therefore, it's good enough for me to just point out how bad the problem is. The problem's really bad, so we should pass a law. So we should pass my law. Well, your law is not going to solve the problem, then we shouldn't pass it, no matter how bad the problem is. If your law is going to solve the problem but cause other problems that are even worse, then we shouldn't do it, even no matter how bad the problem is. Problem admiring is not an advocacy for any particular course of action, nor even for a course of action in general. It's quite possible that no matter how bad the problem is right now, it lacks inherency, which is to say, it will solve itself in the status quo in a reasonable amount of time without us doing anything. And many problems are best solved by leaving them alone for a while. So, I don't know if Jordan Peterson would agree with all this or not. I don't know if I think he wouldn't exactly disagree with it. I think he'd see it as I do, which is we're kind of coming at the same problem from a different angle. My perspective, though, is if we want to do the right thing, let's stop allowing people to make impact arguments where they're predicting impacts in chaotic systems where prediction is impossible because it's not deterministic. That would be a good thing to do. Let's disallow people making those kind of arguments. It doesn't matter what side they're arguing for or what they're arguing for. Let's disallow it across the board. Anytime somebody tries to do that, say, you're trying to make predictions about a chaotic system. It's like you're saying, because we can predict accurately it's going to be raining on Tuesday 7 years from now, we should do blah. Well, the first part of your sentence is fucking stupid and wrong, so whatever comes after it's irrelevant. You can't predict something in a chaotic system that far out. It just doesn't work. And when you're talking about how given expenditure of public money is going to impact it's going to have myriad unintended impacts as well that may or may not get counted in your impact calculus, and the chances are it's not going to achieve what you think it's going to achieve, depending on how narrow the scope of the action is and how broad the intended impact is expected to be. A lot of times it'll have counterintuitive impacts or impacts you specifically don't want rather than the ones you do want. And so, additionally, it's susceptible to its own form of system disease. Namely, you could have mission creep, for example, is a form of systems disease. It's implicit to the system. Or you have, department persistence. It's like where certain departments, they just persist because they make enough work to justify their budget. They say, okay, here you have this much money to spend on office supplies. They'll find some fucking office supplies to spend it on, right? They're not going to be like, oh, well, here's your half of this money back, so we don't really need all those office supplies. And they're going to have to anticipate when they need office supplies later in the year, right? Like, okay, well, we'll probably need this many office supplies. Unlike a business that actually has a sensible way of doing things where they go, we should go buy more office supplies because we're out of them right now, or we're running out tomorrow, That's when you get more office supplies. You don't anticipate how many fucking pieces of paper you're going to need for the next year and buy it in advance. Thanks, government. Anyway, this kind of stuff needs to be pointed out. There are qualities in systems that preclude certain kinds of arguments from having legitimacy. And yet they're afforded legitimacy on a regular basis. So when I talk about a discourse-based approach to moral agency, what I'm saying is don't worry about slaying dragons. Worry about keeping the dragon slaying lanes clear so that everybody learns how to slay properly. Worry about the ecosystem, not any of the creatures within the ecosystem. Learn detachment from content or locutionary meaning and become aware of the illocutionary source of all claims. They're sourced from an individual, first and foremost. People who purport to speak in the name of a community are lying to you. They're committing a reification fallacy. They don't speak for such a community. They're lying to themselves probably as well, so I guess that means they wouldn't be lying to you. But they are damaging the world. What hurts the world more than anything else? People making bad arguments and getting away with them. That's it. It doesn't matter. Whatever your thing is, like, but we should have this public policy. If you win the argument, absolutely. If you win the argument, you will have that public policy eventually. The best arguments do eventually decide matters. Things change. Now, they don't always change for the better. We see things tend to go overboard in certain directions before they correct. Look at hate speech legislation and shit, which is stupid as fuck. Failing to understand that metaphysical impacts and physical impacts can't be conflated in that fashion. Anyway, yeah, stuff goes too far. Is tolerance a good thing? Sure. Is it good to be racist? No. Why? Well, because you're arbitrarily hating certain people for make-believe reasons. That's not good. Is it worse to be racist than it is to hate Democrats? No. It's the same thing. Maybe a different scale, I don't know. Like, in terms of number of people. Democrats would be worse, I guess, because they're more of them. But regardless, it's just being shitty. There's no moral issue involved in it. Unless I actually do harm and transgress against people, I'm not really engaged in morally prohibited behavior. But I'm one who ascribes to an individual moral code that's higher than the technical minimum. In other words, I technically don't think there's anything transgressive about being racist, and there's nothing actually immoral about being racist. I do think that people give it so much credit, like, oh, we're gonna protest these racists. Racists? You guys are fucking morons. Protesters? You guys are fucking morons. You guys are both fucking morons. You're getting all upset about this make-believe shit. We hate the people with wings on their ears. No! The people with wings on their ears are good! There aren't any fucking people with wings on their ears, you morons. This is what happens when a discursive environment is not enforced and instead a conclusion-based environment is enforced. Where, well, racism's bad, so things that oppose racism are good. No! Fucking stupid, stupid, stupid people. Left, right, they're both fucking stupid. Team people. This is my team, and we're correct, and we're morally indignant. Well, this is my team, and we're correct, and we're morally indignant. Well, my team says you're both fucking stupid. There's no point in being morally anything about it. You're being stupid, and wrong, and stupidly wrong. And your stupid wrongness is fucking shit up. So that pisses me off. What I suggest is a solution that involves you getting shamed for your stupid wrongness. Why? Not because the conclusions you're asserting are wrong, but because the justification that you use for making those claims is not valid. It does not withstand scrutiny. It lacks consistency in that it fails to pass the reciprocal burdens test. You won't accept conclusions that one must naturally draw from the same justifications you use to justify the conclusion that you keep asserting is true. So it doesn't matter what the specific things are that are being talked about. It's all about the mechanics of argumentation itself. If we are true to a dialectic, that is to say, not rhetorically driven, not trying to be adversarial and winning, but instead trying to actually parse out what's actually true and not true, and moral and good and not good, and to reconcile the inevitable contradictory boundary between particularism and universalism. Understand that the role of each, principalism is there to provide us a framework through which we can adjudicate particular instances. And particularism is there to provide us the means to escape principalism when it runs counter to a larger value. What is that larger value? Well, ultimately, it is, always will be, and always has been justice. Justice. That's the largest value of all. I might say autonomy or whatever else, but it's justice. It's the only value that we ever compete about. What's right and what's wrong. So, I would say be wary of those who make strong claims about knowing what is just and knowing what is unjust. And instead embrace a means-based mechanism to determine correctness, moral agency, the course of one's moral agency. To determine the course of one's moral agency correctly, use the mechanisms of argumentation that allow us to be fair to one another. Allow us to know who's actually making sense and who's just blowing smoke up your ass. In this video, I tried not to, or I didn't really try, but I mostly didn't advocate anything in particular. I just talked about how to advocate things, and that the way forward is through an evolution in the human species that understands belief as argumentation, that understands advocacy as affirmation, that communicates with one another in a way that respects the burden of the affirmation, and that actually takes into account a real understanding of the way systems work, a real understanding of the limits of human ability to make predictions, and a respect for the scope and size of human hubris, the arrogance with which people presume to know what's best for other people and to justify the use of force in pursuit of those ends. The ends don't justify the means. They never have, and they never will. And until we take a means-based, discourse-based, dialectic-based understanding of moral agency into the future, we'll never realize the optimal future that we otherwise might. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And also, please help, if you're willing to, help Talking to Fancy will reach 1 million total views by sharing this video or some other video on the channel with friends, neighbors, coworkers, dogs, etc. Bye.